Good evening. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the St. Helena Planning Commission for February 16th, 2016, and ask Aaron Heacock to lead us in the pledge. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Kovalstein,
Here.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Here.
Commissioner Monette,
Here.
Vice Chair Christner,
Here.
Chair Parker.
Yes, or present. Moving on to the public forum, this is an opportunity for the public to address the commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed on tonight's agenda. Because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the commission may not engage in discussion nor take action on matters not described on the agenda. Would anyone like to speak at public forum? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to our consent items. We have three. I'm going to list them. One is the approval of the minutes of our February 2nd, 2016 meeting. The other is a design review exemption of 1000 Main Street. And then the third is a design review exemption of 1451 Big Rock Road. Would anyone like to pull any of the consent items?
I move that we approve the consent items.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Vice Chair Kisner,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Commissioner Kovalstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. Moving on to our public hearings, we have one this evening. This is a demolition permit for 1724 Tainter Street. May we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair Parker and members of the commission. The project before you tonight is a demolition permit to retroactively approve demolition of the previously existing home at 1724 Tainter Street. On July 7, 2015, the Planning Commission approved design review to allow a renovation and addition to the existing structure located at 1724 Tainter. This design review included a request to demolish a significant portion of the home that was previously there, and I'll see if I can bring up on the overhead the demolition plan that was approved with the design review submittal by the commission. So this plan, which is a little challenging to see, but the dark lines were the walls originally approved to or proposed to remain, and the dashed lines were the walls that were originally proposed and approved to be demolished. So you can see a majority of the existing home or previously existing home was proposed to be demolished. The walls here and along the front were the walls that were demolished in addition to what was previously requested and approved. As a result, staff, or at this time, given the scope of the amount of structure proposed to be demolished, staff should have required a demolition permit as a component, a discretionary component of the application. However, staff did not require that at that time. And so, given code sections...
Noah, can you move it up so that we can see the walls that were not to be demolished, the dark, yeah,
A lot of them.
a little farther down.
I think you can't because of the way the paper is.
It's a little awkward size.
Which code sections were you
I'm about to get to those.
Maybe you can just
Put
take
it on
out
sideways, Noah.
or just pull it out of the packet.
There we go.
There you go.
That's better.
And Tainter Street is out here.
Yeah.
So code sections 17-164-050, which is the applicability section of the design review, says no permit authorizing the demolition of any building within any zoning district shall be issued until approved by the commission. So that's specific to a demolition permit, saying that the commission has the authority to do that, and staff should not issue those permits. Then you go down to section E3, design review of the proposed replacement structure. One of the findings or conditions of approving a demolition is that the design review of the proposed replacement structure is approved prior to the approval of the demolition of a housing structure. So procedurally, A demolition permit following a design review is correct, however, not with the amount of time that has passed since the previous approval, and with the scope of work that was already done. However, staff, when reviewing the building permit submittal for this project, which they are trying to move forward with construction, this deficiency in the requirement for the demolition permit was identified. The applicants very willingly filed that application. We were able to get it before the commission. Essentially, it's a procedural step, although there has been some letters sent in voicing significant concerns over kind of retroactive actions, as well as some of the perception that this may give to the public. I wanted to comment on a couple of the things that were specific to those letters. Demolition is an ongoing issue in St. Helena, or has been for a number of years. It was on the list of items that the Planning Commission has asked staff to work on, that was present and provided to staff when I was hired in May. And then also, we have worked to revise the entire code enforcement process. We're working with the attorney's office. Some of that direction came out of the short-term rental review, which all of you were a part of, whereas we identified some needs for additional enforcement procedures and mechanisms there. And then also just general analysis of the code enforcement process. Code enforcement here in St. Helena is looked at as more of a criminal and a criminal element or civil penalty assessment, rather than just procedural steps set up in the code. And so staff's looking to make some modifications to the code requirements that allow it to be more procedural and just more prescriptive, and take out both the criminal element of it, as well as the kind of the civil penalties, because those tend to essentially require lawyers to get involved in, and don't allow staff to implement a lot of the enforcement procedures that we would like to be able to do. Further, staff has included a zoning code interpretation in your packet, kind of along the lines of the administrative determination conversations we've been having over the past weeks, with the goal of trying to clarify some of the issues regarding non-conforming structures and features of those non-conforming structures remaining while other portions of the structures be demolished. That's a separate issue, but I just wanted to speak to it because I know there were a lot of letters that came in voicing concern, and I want citizenry to know that staff is aware of these issues and we're trying to move forward. But this situation is essentially a procedural requirement that staff is requesting the Planning Commission to act on in order to fulfill the requirements of the zoning code and issue a building permit for the project. They are implementing an approved design, and while they did go beyond the approval of the demolition, there was a significant amount of demolition identified in the past approval. Those are the reasons that staff is recommending approval of this demolition permit retroactively. I'm available for questions, and the applicant is here to provide a presentation if there are any questions or desire to hear from the applicant by the commission.
Are there any questions, staff?
I just have one. I was confused. I mean, I wasn't here in July, so I didn't see the case originally. But in our packet, there was a plan that's A2. It says existing floor plan and proposed demolition plan. And that proposed demolition plan shows everything coming down except the 2 garage walls. But it may have been updated. I can't read the dates on here. When I looked at this, I thought this was what they originally proposed, was to take everything down except.
You may have an updated version. This is what was in the packet. I've been having numerous conversations with the applicants, including getting some updates to the building permit submittal, and that you may have an updated version.
So you think they updated this to show the extra walls?
What
that
the
they did?
actual demolition is? That's correct. Oh,
It's
you know
got
what?
July.
I'm sorry.
But this is for the new demolition.
That's what was submitted with the demolition application by the applicant, required by staff.
Okay.
This is what was previously approved.
I
So
gotcha.
they are just providing the most factual information regarding what actually was demolished on the site.
Even though
And
the date
that-
on that printout is July?
Most likely the architect
That's
or
the-
draftsman didn't update it, but we can ask the applicant.
Oh.
This is the
Oh,
approved
okay.
demolition plan in the submittal.
So that date is not necessarily the date of the most recent update. Okay.
That's correct. If you look in the cover sheet, there's probably a date stamp on the front page of that submittal.
It says the 19th
Oh,
of
yeah.
2016,
It's
so I'm
not
going to guess
legible,
January.
but it says
So that was
9/26.
so that's the submittal that came in with the demolition plan.
So what date, what month is that?
It's probably January,
See it.
because it's 2016.
Yeah, it must be,
Yeah.
yeah.
The request was on the 17th of January.
It's got to be January.
It's got to be January this year, Bobby.
Yes, I know.
And so the additional portion of the east wall that has been demolished will be 5 feet off the lot line when it's put back? Is that correct? Maybe I should rephrase that. My basic understanding was when they proposed to take out part of the east wall and put the addition on, the understanding was that the east setbacks would be 5 feet.
That's correct.
Okay.
The eastern property line and a majority of the western property line provide a minimum of a 5-foot setback. However, the garage portion does not provide that setback, as that's an existing wall that the applicant was originally proposing to remain in order to keep that setback that's existing.
And they're proposing to keep those 2 garage walls that are there.
That's correct.
Are there any other questions to staff?
If those 2 walls were to come down for some reason, then it would just be a new ballgame. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Essentially, that's correct. There are some nuances to that if it were to be a fire or something like
Well,
that.
I mean, deliberate.
But if it was deliberately demolished, that's exactly right.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Are there any ex parte communications to
I had one other question for staff, sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
And there have been absolutely, because again, I was a little confused by the dates as well, but there have been no changes to the building plan. So the fact that this project runs, the setbacks are going tightly along that 5-foot line, but that's exactly as it was approved in July.
That's exactly right.
And, the treescape and all that, there's no changes there. And we're looking specifically at the fact that they took out these other walls.
That's exactly the case. The applicants are proposing no changes from what was approved previously by the commission.
Oh, the design review.
The design review, that's correct.
I have one more question, if I may. We do have a letter here from the adjacent neighbor about the condition of the property, and I think some of the things that they are concerned about are legitimate, and I'm wondering to what extent these, if we authorize the issuance of a demolition permit, these are handled by the demolition permit itself, or if we need to impose conditions on our approval tonight
I was thinking
to
the
make
same
sure that all of these issues are taken care of.
I think both the letters indicate that.
The demolition procedures in the zoning code don't come with prescriptive requirements, so if there's direction from the commission regarding timelines for removal of debris or those types of things, that should be as a condition of approval. The applicant has secured the site with construction fencing at the direction of staff prior to submitting their application for demolition, because that was an issue that we heard about from the neighbors and had them address.
Any other questions? Any ex parte disclosures?
I visited the site, but I did not speak with applicants.
Yeah, I visited the site so I could figure out what was going on.
I also visited the site.
I did also.
All right, perfect. Okay, with that, I'm going to open up the public hearing. Please keep your comments to the demolition permit itself, not the design review, and there is a time limit of 3 minutes. Would the applicant like to speak first? That is the typical protocol.
Hi, my name is Randy Waller. I am the one of the owners of 1724 Tainter. As Noah stated, we did receive our approval of the project in 2015. We, at that time, given what the demolition the demolition plan, we were not required to get the permit that we need now. We did obtain a Bay Area Air Quality Management Department J number for the disposal. So we were doing everything we thought we were supposed to do as far as the demolition was concerned. We hired a professional demo company to do it because there's lead-based paint, asbestos, and things like that. When we discovered that they had gone too far, we stopped immediately and went down to see Noah and say, what do we do? And the reason that they went too far is because those 3 walls have dry rot asbestos and they weren't suitable to remain. So we more or less turned ourselves in to say, hey, here's what happened. What do we do? He said, you need to go back for an approval, and that's why we're here. So we're really just asking to build the plan that was approved. There are no changes. I did read the emails that came through from some people that live nearby, and we were labeled as rogue developers doing something dishonest, breaking the law, things like that. Just to mention, we did build the house across the street at 1723 Tainter. We received all the proper permits, all the proper approvals. We adhered to the FAR requirements, the setbacks, everything like that. When our foundation was poured, we realized that our foundation was 18 inches too close to the property line. We stopped our project for 2 months to come back here and tell you what had happened and get the proper variance. We were commended for that, and it was approved unanimously. So that should tell you that now for the second time, we've realized something was outside of the approval. We've stopped, we've come right back here to make sure we're doing the right thing.
Perfect, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak in public? Oh, if you could come up to the podium and state your name, that would be most appreciated.
Hi, I'm Marissa Noakes, and I live next door to, 1724. And I'm here tonight because I moved to the city to raise my children, and I feel that this total disregard to how the permit was taken is a violation to the safety of my children. I can't tell you that how dangerous the property was left. It's appalling. There was just total disregard for safety. He just mentioned that a professional crew came in and demoed the property. Well, if there's asbestos and lead paint, and you'd think people would wear masks, gloves, protective wear, none. I saw the whole thing get taken down. I'm just saying, I think I don't know, maybe it was a mistake that it was taken off, I don't know. But what I'm saying is how they left it was very unsafe. They tore it down, and they left the sewage pipes uncapped. They stuffed them with rags. Sewage has gas. Gas can leak. They left roofing material everywhere that could have asbestos in it. They did get 2 dumpsters. They took away mostly the interior. They were very adamant about taking the interior, and they left the porch in the front of the yard. So I felt like there was almost like this. They were trying to get some of the material out and then leave some of the material. I think they actually moved one of the walls, because the wall that's in the corner, on the corner right of that building, is now where the garage stands. If you look, there's no windows in that garage. If you go to the property, there's a wall that's connected with this 2 really long pieces of wood. And so I think that that's what happened. I lived across the street when they built the other house. They were extremely disrespectful. More than once, I had my driveway blocked. More than once, I had to complain to them because I had garbage. Not just garbage, I had paint garbage, buckets, all this building stuff stuffed into my garbage. Have you ever seen the Larry David where he throws something away in Beverly Hills and his neighbor freaks out and he's like, that's my garbage, and he calls the cops and everything? That's how it felt. It's been a total disregard to our living in our house, and I've had to live next door, and I actually called the city and complained about the city because it was an unsecured lot. They came 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks now, it's been 3 weeks, and put the lot up, and the site has been like that since Thanksgiving. I called the city to complain about it and talk to him about it, and they hadn't, he didn't even have to ask me what the address was. He knew before I even said the address what property I was talking about. That's how bad it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Kim Finney, 1301 Allen Avenue. Thank you for reading my letter and especially for visiting the property. We were late today, and this is important. It comes down to a neighborly issue and honoring neighbors and neighborhoods and maintaining a certain integrity. We were driving down Spring Street on our way here, and Shannon, the woman who had had a stroke in a walker, was in the middle of the street flagging us down. She had ventured too far from her home to go to the grocery store, and it started getting dark, and she realized, I'm not going to make it home. Marissa knows Shannon, and I know Shannon, and we put her in her car, and we drove her home. You guys are the best neighbors. And this is, to me, what it comes down here. I've chose to raise my family here. I've been here 20 years. I'm sorry I've never met you. I'm sorry you're not going to live in the home because it's a great neighborhood. I just ask that you take a good look at this project, the scope of it. The garage in that picture, if it is the old home, doesn't have any windows. The wall that's in that place now was moved from the back. There's 2 window holes in it. I just don't trust this project. I don't trust asking for forgiveness instead of permission 2 times, 2 projects. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at the public hearing?
Hi, good evening. Matthew Demchuk, 1702 Tainter. I'm right next door to Marissa on Tainter Street as well. I'm kind of taking this from a different angle because I think you need to look at what staff is recommending under agenda item, I think it's 9. It's actually misnamed in the thing, but it's agenda item 9, which I think you referred to as far as an interpretation of the ordinance. Because if you read exactly what they've put in this agenda item, they say that the determination is to clarify that if a structure is intentionally demolished beyond 50% of the market value of the structure, that structure is required to be brought into conformance with current zoning requirements. Alternatively, a variance may be approved by the Planning Commission, which allows the non-conforming elements to be reconstructed. And then it talks about interior renovations. If you apply that logic to this case, then the permit should not be issued, because that's exactly what staff is recommending. So they've put it first in the agenda for the approval of this. I think it should be reversed. I think if you decide that this is the direction that you're going to apply this ordinance, that it should be applied to this permit as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing?
Good evening, Susan Kenward, 2835 St. Helena Highway. Good evening. I don't know if can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm so short. I'm here representing Citizens Voice, and the comments I make are on its behalf. I also went by the property. I was asked to go by and have a look at it, and I was flabbergasted at what a state it was in, and the fact that it was all gone. It was just totally demolished. So one of the thoughts that I had was that the new mantra in St. Helena is just do it and apologize later. It seems like this has happened twice with this builder. Ask for one thing, do what you want, and then apologize. How convenient would it be for each of us decided when and how the rules and laws apply to us separately and be our own judge, and then when it isn't appropriate to take the laws and rules into our own hands? Sometime we have to draw the line. The method of doing business is becoming endemic in St. Helena. The zoning codes, regulations, and processes of St. Helena are an insurance for the stability of our property values for us all, as well as protection for our entire community. If you don't start drawing the line, why even bother with having codes and rules? Why don't you just take each project as it comes along and rule on whether the current council likes the people or needs the more money rather than the agreed upon codes and regulations? At the very least, everyone keeps saying the city needs more revenue. Why shouldn't there be a massive fine for this kind of behavior? Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing? But I feel like it's the applicant back, so they are offered an opportunity for rebuttal. So if you'd like to come forward, you may. It's your choice.
I guess the only thing I have to say is that, we do apologize for the way the site was left, but that's the way we were instructed to leave it, that we shouldn't touch it. Once we realized what was happening, that we needed to stop. No more work needed to be done to the site, fence it, come back for approval, and then move forward. So if there are any safety concerns, things that need to be addressed immediately, we are happy to do it. We're happy to go there and get rid of absolutely everything we can get rid of to make sure that it's safe. We just need the approval to do so.
Can I ask you who instructed you to leave? If you knew that there was asbestos and lead, who instructed you to leave it that way?
Well, we were under the impression that we should not remove anything else from the site. And that was, if I misinterpreted what
you said you were instructed by. Who were you instructed by?
Well, we were instructed by staff not to do anything else to the site.
City staff, you're talking
Yes.
about. Okay.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the applicant?
I'd like to hear from the applicant if you in fact moved or altered the wall on the east side or did anything to it, if
No,
you would
not
believe
that
that.
I'm aware of at all. Again, I'm not a part of the demolition crew. I'm an owner of the property. I'm not the contractor either. So when we went out to the property, the first time I saw it, when we went down to talk to Noah, the walls on the end were removed, and the demolition crew told us that they had taken those down because they were rotted and that there was asbestos and things like that, and they figured that it had to come down. So we stopped and went to see Noah.
Which walls? You mean the garage walls were the ones in question were removed at that?
No, I actually
No.
have a slide if you want me to show you.
I'm just curious. Do you remember the wall of the garage not having windows and now noticing that it has 2 windows?
No, I do not.
You don't remember that? Okay.
I'm
I mean,
not
what do
aware
you
of
think?
any of the garage walls having been moved.
You're not aware of that, but what do you think of the of 2 witnesses saying
Feels
that?
like a witch hunt to me.
Okay. Well, okay. So all right. So you're not concerned about that. All right. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right. And with that, I'm going to close the public hearing and wait for Noah and Aaron to, I believe, are coming up with an answer for us.
So I'm just looking at the existing elevations of the home, which are included in your plan set from the original design review. And those do have windows in the east elevation, however, not the west elevation. And then if you look on the proposed west elevation, there is a window cut into that wall at that time, and the wall is re-sided in different materials, et cetera. So without knowing the timing of any of these things, the approval did include a window in the west elevation of the garage and re-siding that wall.
But what I'm confused then, because what I think I heard the applicant just say is that that wall was taken down and must have been I think no, he didn't say that. Okay, I'm sorry. But there's one window in the proposed wall, and the people who are saying there are windows in there said there are 2 windows in there now. It would certainly be easy to check whether there are 2 windows in there now. It seems, but yeah.
All right. Are there any other questions of staff before we start discussion?
Oh, I wanted
Just-
to know if you would clarify that one of the members of the public mentioned the 50% rule, and that, if not for both of us, for me, that applies only if it's an involuntary demolition.
So
I
current,
think that needs
that's
to be
correct. So
clarified.
currently, the code identifies that if your property, if you have an existing non-conforming property and it's damaged involuntarily, so a fire, an earthquake, those are the types of things, then if it's less than 50% of the value, then you can rebuild your home as it is. If the demolition, or the destruction is more than 50% of the value, then you have to demolish the rest of it or bring the entire structure into conformance.
But those rules don't apply to voluntarily.
That section of the code is silent on how to treat this situation, or it could be interpreted to being silent. It's staff's opinion that it's fairly clear. However, past practice has been, if you leave, and this is how it was explained to me, I've only been here since May again, but if you leave a certain wall that encroached into setbacks, that was typically approved and allowed by the commission within approving design reviews. So the intent of the zoning code interpretation is to clarify moving forward how that code will be interpreted for folks who are trying to figure out what to do with their properties.
So we're going to go with precedence rather than letter of the ordinance in this case? I mean, is that the direction? That's what I think I just heard you say, the direction we're going is.
Rather than going with precedence and saying that, rather than acknowledging as what's a perceived precedence from staff's opinion, that if you leave one wall standing, you don't have to bring your property into conformance, staff is trying to provide some technical and specific direction that if you demolish more than half of the structure, you are required to bring the entire structure into conformance with the regulations, regardless of whether the portion that you're demolishing is conforming or not.
But in this case, you're going to go by the precedent.
In this case, the applicant has an approved design review. So the design of the project is not in question. The location of the wall is not in question from staff's perspective. This is from the staff's perspective, and I acknowledge what the neighbors have heard, and when I got a call from the direct neighbor identifying the concern. I had also been in conversation, and I can't remember if I had just talked to the applicant or why it was familiar to me, other than maybe I had seen it, but I called them, had them fence it to secure it because she indicated she was concerned with folks being able to just walk onto the site and the potential hazards. Obviously, I didn't direct them specifically to leave hazardous debris, but I did say you can do no more work until you get your demolition application filed at the city, and we can move it forward through the process.
Okay.
Because the demolition had gone beyond the approval, and so they were directed to stop.
So the precedent thing happened last July.
That's exactly
That's
right.
not
So
forward. Okay.
currently, like I said, they have an approved design to build a new home on this site. The approved design incorporates these walls into it. They are now asking to incorporate less walls, as indicated in the submittal. The design will not change in any way from the appearance or setbacks from what was previously approved.
Well, the only thing that gives me any pause is it's been suggested that that wall that needed to stay up was actually taken down and replaced by something. If that's the case, then it's a little different. So I mean, I don't know what's.
So there was nothing in the previous approval staff report that talked about the specifics of that wall or it coming down or being left up or any of those things. And this gets back to the point of the need for an interpretation, because that wall was approved to remain, but there is not a question, or it was not questioned as to the amount of structural alteration that would be required in order for it to remain and be incorporated into the house.
I know, but I thought that it was if it remained, then that supported the nonconformity. If it did not remain, then the nonconformity would not be acceptable. That's why it seems important to me, unless I'm.
No, that is the gist of the previous argument as to why walls would be left to remain.
So if the wall was taken down and another and moved, I mean, I think that's an important. I don't know how we can handle that.
Well, if you think about this, from what the applicants are saying, the entire reason the reason that most of the home came down was because of the structural integrity of the house was not solid. So when you're demolishing 80% of a building and you're trying to leave portions of it remaining, those portions may also not be structurally solid. So did the wall fall over? Those types of things, I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
I guess it brings question to if in July it had been known that the whole thing would have had to have been demolished, which it wasn't. I know. It would have been a different
you are correct.
procedure. That's why
That's
it seems
exactly
important.
right.
Yes.
That's exactly right. And this, frankly, this is a very common situation when someone proposes to leave portions of a structure or even renovate a structure without doing exploratory demolition to see what the soundness of the structure is. You kind of don't know what you're going to get until you get into the walls and all of those things, which is, I mean, when you have a housing stock, that was primarily built in the 30s and 40s and 50s, those issues are going to come up.
Do you see any way of confirming or not confirming what accusations have been made? Because they
I have no way of all of doing that.
Okay.
Who else would like to throw in their hat?
We're discussing now?
Yes, we're discussing
Okay.
now.
I guess I'd like to lead off and see what other people think. First of all, I appreciate the staff's effort to clear this up with our later agenda item, but I don't think that the later agenda item is really pertinent to this. I don't think it can be applied retroactively to a case that's already been heard and decided. And I had a lot of confusion about this case myself, not being here in July. But my understanding is that with the exception of that corner of the garage that is encroaching in the west side yard, everything that is being built complies with the zoning requirements. And so I'm not so troubled by coming in later for the demolition permit, except that this reminds me a little bit of the short-term rental that went ahead without the required license. Here we have a developer who has experience in the community. It's kind of beyond my comprehension that you could start taking down a building without a demolition permit. And part of, the blame may lie, with the city for not being on top of everything, but nonetheless, I don't think you'd start taking down a building without a permit. And I'm particularly troubled by the condition that the property has been left in. And I don't know if any of the fines that apply to violating the ordinance are applicable in this case, but I certainly think that our approval should be conditioned on cleaning up the condition of the property now, as soon as possible. I was there today, and I was equally appalled by what I saw, and to hear tonight that it's been sitting there like that for months is
Heartbreaking.
That makes me
Yeah.
think the rain has put the asbestos in the ground. I wonder if that's a problem. And put all of it in the ground, so
Right.
there might be some toxic contamination at this point. I don't
Yeah,
know.
when I heard about all the lead paint and everything, I thought, well, this stuff is just laying around out here. I also think that the issue of the windows in the garage is irrelevant, because what's important there is where's the garage wall lying in relation to the property line, not how many windows you put in it, unless it's some code violation, which I don't think it is in this case. So I think that when they decided to keep those 2 garage walls, if they wanted to put more windows in them, as long as they asked for it, it's okay.
Commissioner Sweeney?
I share Commissioner Koberstein's thoughts on what's relevant and what's not. I am troubled by the fact that across the street, they threw footers 18 inches that they knew were not correct, and then came back and asked for apology. We said, okay, we're doing this again. I think they're different cases, but I just think that it's something to be mindful of. I do have an issue with that. In this case too, if the reason they kept demolishing the property and didn't stop at the planned walls is because of lead paint, or you just had asbestos or other problems, that I have a hard time believing this wall didn't also have that issue. So, I don't feel good about this, but at the same time, I think from a purely process standpoint, we approved the design review in July. The design has not changed. Some of the questions and concerns that neighbors raised were about what the neighborhood would feel like, the size of the home, all that. And unfortunately, I think although I empathize with the neighborhood, I don't think that's relevant for the discussion here. It's really about the demolition. So, I feel kind of a little bit between a rock and a hard place in terms of empathizing with neighbor concerns. They're probably very valid in terms of how this project has been handled, what the house looks like today. Again, these are professional builders, and it would be a real stretch, I think, to interpret your direction to just say walk away and leave this as it is. So I'm troubled by a disconnect between what the applicant is saying their intentions are and what their actions would imply that they know a little more about what's going on. However, I don't know that the code helps us in any of those things. So therefore, if we're just discussing issuing a demolition permit to complete the job and get the site cleaned up, I have a hard time saying we can't do that.
And I agree with both my fellow commissioners. I guess another thing that bothers me, however, is that if I look at this, it looks like the walls that they were going to leave almost equal the ones that they were going to take down. And if I was a developer, I would be very reluctant to let somebody do demolition for me that didn't come and ask me before they demolished more, because I know they were going to double the cost of the demolition. I can't believe that they didn't know what was going on. But I agree with the two of you. I don't see what else we can do with this. And I certainly agree with the neighbors, and I think that we ought to get something very strict in there about them cleaning that site right away.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, but I guess I'm a little slow. My sense is we approved the design review in July based on the those 2 walls remaining, and if they didn't, it seems that should make a difference. So I just feel like I don't have enough information. I don't know if those walls have been replaced or not, and apparently there's no way to find out. But I find that it is significant, even though we approved the design review I think, and I may be wrong, but even though we approved it in July, if this significant part of that approval no longer applies, that seems to me there might be reason to do something different. But
can I ask a question or add a comment about that? My interpretation is not that the approval is based on these walls remaining, that just impacts if there's going to be a demolition permit or not required. So the design review was looking at the entire project and what it would look like when it's completed. So if I'm not correct in that, and that the fact that they've changed, that they have proceeded with the demolition impacts the design review, I don't think it does, right? No. So, and the question, if there's no way to get at, if they didn't demolish the wall, sure, if it fell down, they put it back up. I mean, that's not demolishing the wall. The wall's still there. So
Let me ask, is there any way not to approve this? I mean, what would be a reason not to approve it?
Truthfully, from the staff's perspective, if the demolition was not approved, it would create a procedural loop that the applicants could not get out of, because they can't implement their design review without a demolition permit being approved. And they've now demolished so much of it that I was thinking that same question, and I did not have an answer to it.
are there fines? I mean, are there other mechanisms to?
I read the entire section of enforcement in the municipal code, and without separate from declaring the property a nuisance or filing criminal charges, there are not a lot of penalties that staff can implement at our level. If it's declared a nuisance, which sounds like the case or the state of the property would accommodate that. However, I don't believe the applicant will be leaving the property in that state for much longer. Then there would be civil penalties that could be enforced and criminal actions. But unfortunately, the code's essentially written to address long-term derelict properties that people don't clean up, and it doesn't anticipate the need to penalize folks who ask for permission or forgiveness rather than permission. It doesn't give staff the tools to do so in its current state. I will tell you that is not going to be the case for much longer, because we have already worked with the city's attorney's office and rewritten the entire code enforcement section, and now we're just polishing it before we bring it back for council action. But currently, I do not have the authority to impose those penalties, although the building code gives it to the building official to double fee folks for their building permits to do this. We have not adopted those portions of the building code specifically into our code. I did not ask the city attorney to comment on the building code requirements or allowances in conjunction with the city code requirements or allowances, but I will be doing that shortly.
And that wouldn't be something that we would have to have a voice on.
So currently, if you break those rules, there's no negative consequence other than being put into an eternal loop, which you don't want to do.
Currently, if you break the zoning code requirements, the administrative effort in order for the city to enforce penalties is extreme, is how I would clarify it. So I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just
not judicious use of our funds.
in tonight's situation, I would say that this is not a good use of staff time, given that the developers are receptive to direction, trying to address the situation, and appear to have heard the neighborhood concerns about safety.
I also would think that if we took action like that, it would just delay getting that property in a decent shape.
Okay, so this really is a procedural thing.
Commissioner Koberstein?
I would just like to address the other point that Bobby brought up about the additional walls that came down. I was concerned about all of this earlier today before I had more information, but my understanding is the front wall that came down was probably in a conforming location anyway, and the side walls, same thing for the side wall. The east side, yes. Because it's going back in that location and it maintains the setback. So that's not really...
The corner doesn't.
It's the corner of the garage.
The corner of the garage. It's the garage that's making the house non-conforming as far as I understand. Mm-hmm. And so while it would have been great to have more clearly identified what needed to be demolished ahead of time, I don't see that as such an issue unless they were proposing to now take it down and put it back in a non-conforming location. Right. That would be different.
This side.
Yes.
Well, I agree with Commissioner Koberstein, Sweeney, and Kistner full-heartedly. I don't think there's a lot more to add other than I'm sorry for the neighbors. We are definitely going to address the condition of have the sites of demolition permits be as part of the conditions. I think that's definitely something we need to look to going forward, and fines as well, and just general cleanup of the code. So can we have a motion on this demolition
It
program?
would be appropriate if the commission desires to put a timeline in the cleanup.
And do we have conditions that we'd like to add?
Absolutely.
And if whoever does the motion adds that in, that would be most appreciated.
And what is a reasonable but expeditious? Is it 2 weeks, 1 week? I mean,
2 weeks, all right.
is that fast enough? Is that putting some pressure on them?
Cleanup of the site will be separate from the building permit. They're still under building permit review, so he has questions about that.
Okay.
And there's no concern by the staff at all about any toxicity in the dirt now from the rain?
All the demolition was done with the J number from the Bay Area Air Quality Control Board. They're responsible for monitoring and ensuring that gets done. And it's probably the stuff that was taken out in the dumpsters probably was that, without knowing.
But so you don't have any concern to follow up or anything?
The Air Quality Control Board is the agency that's responsible for ensuring that they adequately mitigate those hazards.
But there's a ground issue now because of the rain, and there's lead paint. So there's, I don't know.
Well, that's we don't know that there's any other issue, and we do know that the demolition work that was done under approval from the Air Board, who is the agency responsible for ensuring it was done correctly.
But just sat there for so long. Okay. So you don't have any. Does anyone else on the commission have any concern about that besides me?
I mean, I think along Noah's line, and having personally gone through asbestos abatement and everything else, that was all removed. So it's a mess over there. But in
There might be
theory, if
lead
they
paint.
followed the procedure that their permit dictated they had to follow by Airboat, they didn't leave any toxic materials.
they
I mean, it's
were-
a mess. But that's
I'm
not
assuming that
different.
they were instructed not to move anything. I'm assuming that had they not been instructed not to move anything or hadn't,
It's
that
the
it-
timing. It's the timing.
And I'm just worried about the rain and any lead paint that might still be there and any children that might be playing in that dirt, in years to come. And I just really don't know. I'm not thinking about the air. I'm talking about, I know PG&E had to, do all that stuff. I just wonder if there could be at least a condition for some soil evaluation after it's all cleaned up before something's built. I don't know.
I don't believe we have the authority to require that, especially given that it's a separate agency that's responsible for ensuring that the mitigation was addressed.
Okay.
They wouldn't have. They had to sign off on the completion of the removal of the hazardous materials.
Yes, they do.
So that happened. This is just
Trash.
unfortunate trash left around, right?
Okay.
But, okay.
Who would like to do the motion?
I think that we've determined the project is exempt from the requirements of SECRET under a Class 2 categorical exemption as replacement or construction of an existing structure under Code Section 15302 of CEQA. I think we accept the required findings and approve the demolition permit with proposed demolition of the existing home at 1724 Tainter Street in the medium-density residential district, which was originally approved for remodel and addition. We'd like to include in the resolution that the site must be cleaned up within 3 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks? Was
2
it 2
weeks.
weeks?
And do we need to define what cleaned up means?
I'm writing the condition language right now. A 14-day timeline required for trash and debris removal and overall site preparation or securing of site, something along those lines.
Well, that'll take care of the open pipes and all the rest of it.
For the
Yeah.
safety of the neighborhood.
I can add some language to address that too.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call, please.
Vice Chair Kisner,
Yes.
Commissioner Koblstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Reluctantly, yes.
Chair Parker.
Yes. Thank you very much for coming. And moving on to our next item, this is new business. This is an update to the city's growth management ordinance. Noah, can we have or is it Aaron? Oh, Aaron, may we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chairperson Parker. As it appears, there hasn't been an update on the residential growth management system since 2012. We are presenting this as an informational item and no action is necessary. The city of St. Helena does have a residential growth management system that limits the number of residential building permits that can be issued each year. The stated purpose of the growth management system is to regulate the residential growth of the city to approximately 2% per year while providing for both market rate and affordable housing. According to the growth management system, no more than 9 building permits for market rate housing may be issued each year. Annual allocations of the regulated building permits are to be issued January 1st of each year on a first approved, first served basis. Permits are not issued during the year, are carried over, basically banked into the next year, but are available only for construction of market rate units and developments that include 40% regulated affordable housing. There is currently a bank of 69 permits going into 2016. Although none of the 2016 allotments were issued on January 1st, 2016, issuance of these allotments on this date would have not been possible given that January 1st is a city holiday and staff is not in the office to issue such permits. Given this discrepancy, it is obvious that current GMS code language needs some modification to ensure it can be properly administered. Until these revisions can be implemented, for any new residents proposed, staff will identify the need for residential allotment and the appropriate category it will be available to them. That is all. Noah, do you have anything you would like to add? So we're happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
I find this rollover kind of an interesting concept here, because you're trying to have sort of a gradual increase in housing, but now there's such a backlog, you could have an explosion in 1 year by using all these rollover permits, couldn't you?
You could, but
But-
only 9 of those would be available for strictly market rate. So the remaining would be for market rate housing in a development that has 40% regulated affordable
Okay,
housing.
so rollover doesn't apply just to general
Just to
market.
anything.
Yeah, no,
And
there's
that-
definitely a
That's
a
very
leap.
That number's been pretty consistent over the years, hovering between 50 and 70.
Okay.
And-
If it wasn't for Magnolia Oaks, there'd be.
Well, and that's what I was going to say for the kind of sake of Mary and Mai as being newcomers to this town, to this project. I mean, this is kind of where Hunter comes in, right? And this is where Magnolia Oaks, so this is how developments happen with,
Low-income
And that's how we
housing.
get affordable units from
right.
from
Well, and
larger
beyond local, I mean,
residential
just in
developments.
general, how a development of more than 9 units that otherwise would ironically all pop up at the same time.
They
so.
pull from the bank by doing some affordable housing.
Well, doesn't the city determines the 9 market rate, but ABAG determines the affordable, right? The city doesn't.
ABAG has no role in the growth management system of the city. That's a local.
ABAG gives a suggestion of the
terms of
number
our-
of what
in-
we need.
Well, yeah, in terms of these numbers. The city doesn't decide how many affordable houses it needs every year.
That's right. We have numbers which are we have decided them in our housing element. So that's adopted by forgetting the acronym right now, but it's a state agency that
HCD.
HCD. Thank you.
They're the regional housing allocation needs.
So they
Right.
they work with cities to update your housing element either 4 or 8 years to ensure that you're meeting your housing needs, which include affordable housing.
And those do not roll over. They do not roll over.
2 separate things.
That's right. I
It's
know
two
they're
separate documents.
Well, the housing,
my
it's
point.
not a matter of rolling over. I mean, I guess I look at it a little bit differently in terms of the rollover is that, there's nothing that, we can't drive the marketplace. And if there's recession or whatever else happens and people don't want to take those 9 permits and build them,
Right.
they're not perishable, they don't go away. I mean, we're looking at between now and some point in the future accepting a nominal growth over time. And so it can come in fits and spurts, as does the economy, as do market demand. So
But my
I
point was
understand-
that my point was
I view the rollover in that way. Housing, what our commitments to the state on affordable housing is a completely different separate.
I understand that was my point.
Yeah.
And the rest of my point is that the 9 market rate homes that we have determined 9 and that we determined to roll over, that is what the city has determined, and that is something over which we do have some control to change. That was my point.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's essentially correct.
Okay. Any questions? Any other comments?
And I say that because in the past there have been several efforts to change the rollover rule. That's why I said.
And just to Commissioner Monet's point, the original allocation allotment amount was 13 when the general plan was first adopted in '93, and then that was subsequently reduced by council action. But as Senior Planner Heacock mentioned, this had not been done in 2012, and there's a requirement that staff bring this update to the council once a year in September. It's codified in September, and so we wanted to play catch up, and we wanted to bring this out. And because it was going to commission or council, and it hadn't been done in so long, we wanted to bring it forward to the commission to allow some input and to flag the need to spend some time on it, given that it says we issue all allotments on one day when we're not even at work.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to open up the public for public comment, just so we can be a little procedurally nice here. Would anyone like to speak? No, I'm just here to listen. All right, perfect. Okay, I'm going to close the public comment and invite commissioner discussions, any kind of input we'd like to give Mr. Hausch at this time.
I think I will give him my undivided support at this time.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I know Commissioner Kistner has
I
asked for it a few
particularly want to
times.
thank you, Aaron. I've been hollering about this for 2 years, so now I got another one. We'll start on in a little while.
Okay.
We'll let it go for a little bit. Thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate
No
it.
problem.
All right, and
And
now,
just from my understanding, the only thing you're really looking to address kind of administratively is moving to a date that you're at work, which makes sense.
Well-
But there's no, we're not looking at, nor are you looking to modify any of the process, the numbers, the rollover.
None of the numbers are rollover. One thing may be
process maybe
to,
is the wrong word.
rather than just have one day when allotments are issued,
Yeah.
from staff's perspective, it would probably make more sense to issue them as projects are approved.
They open in a term, give them a period of being open and closed.
Yeah, or just as projects are approved, and then if you got to 9 in 1 year, then even if a design review was approved, we would not issue a building permit for that until the subsequent year, and then the bank would be of approved projects waiting to build rather than the available units.
so you just want to change the language of, on A, annual allocations of regulated building permits shall be issued on a first come, approved, first served basis, just removed the
I mean,
date.
what would you do if it was a Sunday was the first? You wouldn't be there either.
It's a holiday anyway.
Yeah.
So that's one idea, but then it does get into the issue of, or one other thing to think about is, if you had maybe a larger scale market rate project, would you want them to have all 9 allotments in 1 year issued, given that some folks may need, to build another home on their property to accommodate a family situation or what. So that's just another policy discussion for commission and council to have. However, when we do get to modifying this, it's an ordinance. It will come before the commission, and it'll be probably some workshopping done beforehand to make sure we can address the public's input
I
on
would
it.
suggest if you do remove the January 1st date, that you add a definition of what the calendar year for the year is, just so there's.
I agree.
And when it comes to things like changing the number of allocation
Mike,
sorry. And when it comes to topics like changing or, setting a maximum number that any developer could pull or whatever, that's all has to be public. This were kind of.
This is just bringing it to our attention. Okay, perfect. All right, no action needs to be taken on that. Moving on to administrative determinations. This is our lovely zoning code interpretation for demolition of non-conforming structures or features. No.
So just in the spirit of what we had talked about previously with bringing administrative determinations before the commission, both to allow appeals, but also just to inform them. While this is not an administrative determination from staff's perspective, it is along those lines. It's interpreting the code to try with an effort to clarify. My experience that these are very common. As codes are applied, there's discrepancies and concerns. Staff will then make an interpretation so that code is applied consistently. And then when the time is available for staff to do a comprehensive update, those interpretations are then folded into the zoning code update and addressed in one foul swoop, so to speak. This is a little bit of a broad interpretation because it tries to provide a clear or a bright line, to use Commissioner Koberstein's terminology, but a clear line when a developer would be required to bring all of their property into conformance. So this is a common situation that we just saw with the demolition permit, and Senior Planner Heacock and I are working on 2 other projects currently where people are proposing to leave non-conforming elements of their home in the setback and then demolish a majority or a significant portion of other elements, which is, from staff's perspective, not quite in keeping with the intent of the code. So this is just to try to draw a minimum clear line, bright line, saying if you go past this, you will be required to bring the entire structure into conformance. If commission has some input, I'm happy to hear it, but we are looking for very prescriptive lines that we can provide direction to, because just as a part of what we do day to day, people are looking for information from us, and the more clear we can provide in the information, the more helpful it is to us, because then we're answering a question and then the developer can go on, but then also to the developer, because it clarifies what their requirements are going to be.
Well, to me, C, section 1,
Ghostbusters.
section 17-140-030, C, it really confuses the issue. I mean, you said before too, I mean, it says if it's not an act of God or, something else.
If there is a God.
And you're, what? What did you say?
I said if there is a God.
Yeah, exactly. From the force, whatever, not deliberate, that the structure would have to come into conformity.
Well, just as you mentioned, there's two sections. One says, if a structure is altered by any intentionally at all, then it's basically by omission, you have to bring it into conformance. Except then, section C states that you can remodel, rehabilitate, or structurally alter an existing non-conforming feature.
And so that
I don't think those are inconsistent.
I don't
and
either.
I'll tell you why. It's because of the language that's used.
Right.
Rehabilitation is defined in the zoning ordinance. That is correcting a health and a safety problem in the house. Remodeling, that's not construction. And structurally altering might be something that's actually, keeping the house up. It's not reconstructing
Okay,
the
that's where I
structure.
was confused, because, so then it makes sense.
I think the line that says if it does not increase the degree of nonconformity, I think that's clear. I think what is less clear is when we get into value. I'm more troubled by D, and I think that's what you're trying to correct with a percentage of structure versus a percentage of value. Because like in the case of we saw here, even if they had taken everything out and left a couple of walls, the value is beyond 50%. So I think it's a much cleaner piece to say, here are the walls. You take out more than 50%. You've altered the process, and so the project, and therefore now it's a zero-sum game. You're back to having to be conforming.
And staff completely agrees, but we're trying to address the existing code language without trying to a whole new ordinance and a whole new process in order to rewrite the code to get to what you're saying.
So basically, we need to define the line of what is a remodel and what these projects are and what is triggering demolition permits.
So I am confused then. I thought I wasn't, but I am. So if you're saying that your staff is trying to avoid a new code or new...
to clarify what the current code says prior to doing a code cleanup comprehensively, yes.
Right. So then is the question... So what exactly is your question? Because back to Mary's comment, these things are fairly clear. I mean, if you take time and read them, we're saying it's pretty straightforward. We're saying the only area I think it becomes open for misinterpretation or misuse, perhaps misapplication by the builder, is this idea of 50% of market value, where that becomes harder to measure, I think. So why we wouldn't just say physical space or physical walls or something that's very clean to say there's 4, you took down 2, you've hit 50%.
Well, but I think the code is very clear right now that if you have a non-conforming structure and you intentionally demolish something, you have to put back a conforming structure.
Unless you have a variance. Unless you
And
come to
so,
us.
but apparently what's been happening is people want to keep one wall or something, like the garage. And so the way the code reads, you start demolishing, everything has to conform.
That's correct.
Well, that's
And
what
if
I
you
was-
can't meet that requirement, I think you should come here for variance and explain why you can't leave that garage wall. And there may have been a very good reason in tonight's case. Not only did we have a small lot, we had a lot where the lot line was angling to the back, and there might have been good grounds for a variance. I think we should, unless the council wants to allow this sort of selective demolition and allow certain walls to stay up and others to come down, I would prefer to just say any demolition, any intentional demolition requires you to comply.
So
And when we deal,
come
when
for
we
a
deal with
variance.
these small expansions and enlargements that come before the commission, at that point, we can address how much demolition is occurring. Other than that, I think people should apply for a variance.
I agree.
And given, I should say, maybe phrase it differently, we don't have to be beholden to past mistakes and precedent. So all the concern tonight was about the fact that there have been precedents in St. Helena, but, you know, in spelling out the code, even with, you know, like I said, I'm a little troubled by the 50% of value, but even with that in there, you can still determine that. And so we've just simply not followed our own rule. And we can say today our bright line is that we start following our own rule.
That's correct. Staff was trying to make an interpretation that would maintain somewhat of the status quo while also clarifying what that means for developers. But if the direction from a commission is that any demolition requires the entire structure to be brought into conformance, A, or B, requires a demolition permit to come before the commission, that then they could have some discretion as to what's required, which the one issue would be if the project's working on a portion of the structure, if there's an existing structure where a feature is non-conforming and none of the project scope is affecting that feature, then it's a little bit of a challenge to say you need a variance for something that was probably built legitimately with the building permit 50 years ago or whatever. So that's where the struggle is from the staff's perspective to automatically go to the variance requirement. However, staff, it would be supportable, or I could sit across the desk and communicate this clearly and say it with a straight face, essentially, that you are required to, if you're proposing to demolish something to accommodate a renovation and it's going to expand or modify the building envelope, you're required to bring that before the commission for some input on, is it a structural alteration, is it a remodel, or is it a demolition?
Okay,
Well,
so
and is this an issue that, you know, because we have had prior situations, not about necessarily demolition, but being inconsistent in our application of code. So the fact that the code's the code, but there is a history on this commission, not necessarily these players, but some of these players, some of these not players, whatever, we have been inconsistent. And so then we start running into challenges of suits. And so are we...
And on staff's perspective as well. I mean,
yeah,
from
exactly.
staff, yes.
So, I mean, even though I just said a moment ago that precedent shouldn't be binding to us, are we opening the door? Do we need you know, council's view on, to the extent we can interpret? Because I
For a
think
start date to have this
from a-
not be so retroactive.
Yeah, from a practical standpoint, we have a code. If we just enforce the code and made good decisions around variances, we should be able to do that. However, does that then down the road create havoc?
Well, I think it would be...
From a legal perspective.
Well, not from a legal perspective, but from a perception perspective and what folks are used to being able to do, it would be a very big change for the building community, which they're already experiencing that with some of the projects that I'm working with them on right now in my application and strict application of code and making people come back before the commission and those types of things.
I wanted to ask then, okay, to clarify. So you were mentioning, Mary, that not, okay, so structurally altered does not include demolition. Is that accurate?
Sometimes you would have to demolish something to structurally alter it. A foundation is an excellent example of that. A 50-year-old foundation that's completely rotten, you would demolish that foundation and re-pour it under the existing wall that you propped up while you did that.
Well, then, I mean, that's what I think, then it becomes confusing to me. And I'm thinking, I mean, the thing that comes to my mind is if you tore down something, you were going to structurally alter, and therefore you could continue the nonconformity. If you were going to build a second story, let's say, and you had to demolish something to do that, the nonconformity might be okay with one story, but might not be okay with two stories. So just to allow
That's existing
allow that, you
features.
see,
That's existing features only. So you couldn't increase the degree of nonconformity by adding another floor above it.
Well, that's considered a nonconformity to put a second story?
You wouldn't be able to build the second story on the nonconformity because it says the new work does not increase the degree of nonconformity.
I didn't know that building a second story automatically was nonconforming.
Yeah, it wouldn't meet the setback, presumably.
Right.
And it'd be,
Building a
it
second
wouldn't
story
meet the
isn't.
setback.
If you built it on the same footprint that's already non-conforming, you're
You can't-
increasing the amount of.
You said the right word, Tracy, because that's, when I came on the commission, that's what they were going by. As long as you build on the same footprint,
Right.
as long as you use the same footprint, you didn't have to get a demolition permit.
I mean, that's what I didn't realize that a second story is automatically.
But this one,
Well, I
they
would.
had an addition on it, see?
Yeah,
I mean, the setback would be the same, it'd just be a second story.
That's the way they used to do it when I first came on the commission. 6 years ago.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And
All right,
I
thank
think
you.
there
That's my
might be
mistake.
something in writing on that, as long as you build the same footprint.
All right.
But
This
we're
gets
reading
back
this-
to
This
this-
doesn't talk about footprints, this is.
No, but this gets back to interpretation of code
the
and
perception of
application of
it.
code, past practice, perception, all of those things that we're just trying to clean it up and clarify. That's all we're trying to do.
Okay.
But I think that's a good idea.
I agree with Mary. I think that this is very clearly written. I think that it's just the application of it has muddled how it has been applied.
Yeah, and I guess your comment about the the builders, they'll conform, if they want to build here, they'll conform to what you ask them to do, or they don't build here.
I do think you're going to go there. I do share Commissioner Sweeney's concerns with when do we start this? Do we need to have council weigh in on, is this fine? Can we start doing this?
And I meant council with an S. I didn't mean city council.
Oh,
I meant our
our council.
legal council.
Oh.
Like this.
Well, I
meant
the
both.
director of the department is responsible for interpreting the code.
Right.
Legal
Applying
counsel
it.
gets involved if there's a question about that. I guarantee what legal counsel would say is, it says if any demolition's done, it must conform.
All
And
right,
that's
then-
what they would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is our bright line.
So we don't really need to do anything.
No.
However,
Are we delivering, I mean, because, you started the conversation with we want to clean up the code. We kind of round around the horn and had different thoughts on, is it detailed enough or not detailed enough? But I've heard you say that if you don't really want to make a change to it, because that would.
I don't have the resources.
Right,
I mean,
so
yeah.
what,
I need to make a legal.
for us to say this is good, follow these rules?
I think this was for us to, these are the rules, can you please start following them?
I mean,
Well, it was more. We're going to start doing this more regularly because there's a lot of sections of the code that are not clear.
Right.
To A, clarify for applicants, we can hand it to them. B, consistently apply the regulations so it doesn't matter who's getting the answers, they're getting the same answers.
And that's the important part.
This, like I said, this interpretation was written to try to accommodate past practice. If the commission is directing me to not try to accommodate past practice and do a strict interpretation of the code, I am happy to do that. But like I said, it is a shift from what folks who develop in St. Helena are used to. And so,
Are you saying that like it's a bad thing?
No, I apologize, but that just confused me, and I apologize again. But you just said if you want us to follow that you were trying to clean something up. But this is the code as it exists today, or is
no, this is all codified. Yeah.
right. So what is it? So you just said if you want me to follow the rule.
this is what he's adding to it at the bottom.
Oh, okay. Because I read this as a discussion. Okay.
Yeah, basically the code now doesn't allow, if you intentionally demolish something, you can only put back something that's conforming.
You can't, unless you have a variance.
I think
Correct, but it's silent. It implies, or it says that by being silent on. It only says if it's unintentionally damaged, then here's how you do it, which by default means if it's intentionally done, you don't get the right to.
I think
Well,
we
it
should-
says except demolition or intentional removal.
Well, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
It does say except
right.
demolition.
Well, I
So
think we should
if you
do that.
intentionally demolish, you don't have a choice except to make things conform.
Or apply for a variance, and I think that is the way it should be done. I
But
think
the confusion is demolition versus structurally alter, right?
No.
That's
That's gonna be your
interpretation. and-
judgment
Yeah,
call.
Exactly. It's going to be a judgment call every time, and it's going to be somewhat of an argument every time because there's going to be different desires for how it's interpreted.
Well, if there's neighborhood.
But are we in a catch-22? Because you're again, I guess I read the structure or the paragraph on here is kind of how to think about this, and this is what you were trying to get at. But you're saying that if you add this, then we have to start over and create a new,
No, this is just an
No.
interpretation saying,
right,
basically, if you're going to demolish more than 50%, everything has to conform.
yeah.
If you're going to be doing selective demolition, then obviously the areas where the demolition is have to conform.
Exactly. No, I understand that. But short of putting this into code versus interpretation subject to whoever sits on this dais and whoever's in your job. And that,
Which is why you codify it and you write it down and then you create a document of zoning code interpretations.
so you do want to take it to a written format.
It would exist, and this is the written format. It's not a codified modification to the code because it hasn't gone through public process or
Okay.
any of those things. It's just we're interpreting what the code says to clarify it for everyone
And
who
you're
asks
putting
the
that in
question.
writing so everybody knows.
It's always
what
the
these-
same answer.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All
But
right.
aren't you interpreting it to allow then less than 50% demolition?
Based on past practice, yes, that is actually that is completely right.
I
So if the direction from the commission,
That seems like we're not just interpreting it seems like we're rewriting the
Yeah.
ordinance.
I
well,
think
and I understand that, except that if past practice has consistently approved things based on that, then it's this. I just want it to be written down what's being done instead of it being decided case by case without a clear procedure and interpretation of
Right.
what the rules say.
I understand, the box you're in. I think we should maybe take a stance on whether we think that practice should continue, and the council can, weigh in on it. I think it's clear as a bell as it's written. The only problem I have with it, frankly, is the 50% language when you get into it now. It says if you then do a replacement, it has to be done in accordance with the use permit conditions. And you go look at those, and they're not really germane to what you might be thinking about when you're trying to decide if something has to conform or not, which is why I like your variation idea better, because I think it gets to hardship and other issues, self-imposed problems, that the use permit doesn't necessarily get to.
I completely agree. It's just, again, that's staff resources and time to do a whole zoning code modification, which I don't have the resources to do that.
Well,
So,
Right.
is there any way you could do it in a way that's workable, that would promote it's not doing it based on precedence, but doing it based on what it says that and if there were circumstances that needed something different, there would have to be a variance applied
Yes.
for.
Yes.
Or simply
Okay.
strike. I think the
I would do
concern
that.
comes is that if this demolished beyond 50% of the market value of the structure is somewhat saying, I think, if I understood Mary correctly, is that we're reducing the threshold. We're saying, or
That's
actually,
correct.
and so take that out of there. Basically, say the variance may be approved. Kind of start at that point, right? Because you're trying to put into writing what we've done in the past.
Yeah, I don't
This
wanna
group
do
is
that.
saying we don't want to keep doing that.
Yeah.
So by adding
Yes.
that line, you're just basically saying it's now okay and it's in writing that it's okay. And we're saying stick with the code as it is, but then give a interpretation of how a variance would be applied so it's not as, it doesn't put us into the box of use permit.
Yeah.
Right. And
Well said.
the thing I would clarify, if you're going to interpret something, is I would clarify section B, because it does say that you can put an addition on or you can do an enlargement, and in theory, that could entail some demolition, which is intentional demolition, which by virtue of everything else here, you can't do. And so I think the
Without making it
interpretation should be of that provision, that when you're coming to the commission for that the extent of your demolition is part of what's reviewed, along with a design review of your addition.
Then let me ask you, why don't you think that would be applicable to C, since structurally altered could involve a demolition?
I think that, I guess I would look at C as things which are meant to be different, and you could have a structural alteration that was required for a health and safety reason. It might be part of rehabilitation. But the general rule is, these are supposed to go away by attrition. And so you couldn't come to NOAA with a structural alteration that essentially rebuilt the whole house so it could stand there for another 100 years where,
But if B
where it
has
is.
the any demolition caveat, why shouldn't C have the any demolition caveat? There needs to be a variance.
Because you sort of addressed it in B. If you put it there, you don't need it again.
Well, I thought C was weird anyway, but yeah.
I see what you're saying. I just can't imagine. I mean, it could go there too. If the nature of the structural alteration has to come to the commission, but I don't even know if that would be the case.
No, I think I understand the commission's concerns and also appreciate the direction. And I think it's exactly right. It's just the interpretation needs to be for section B and essentially identify that if you modify areas that are non-conforming, they have to be made to conform or get a variance. You can make some modifications to non-conform or conforming elements of a non-conforming building that could be reviewed by the commission. And essentially within that process, we need to define more when a demolition permit is triggered.
And that's sort of your whole, is that 50%, what does that really mean? And that's we've allowed over time that to be leave a wall up and you're good. And we just need to close that loop. So.
Okay, so you don't see
If it's not even supposed to be there, it's supposed to be for acts of God, basically. If there's an earthquake or a fire, has nothing to do with, I want to add on to my house.
So can you, for the sake of what your quest to have something in writing that's not really changing the code, can you just say, that staff will follow the letter of the code, which states that if you do demolition, you need a demolition permit.
Unless you apply for a variance.
And all these other things aren't considered demolition, so therefore you don't.
Yeah, the requirements for demolition are a little bit similar to the requirements for design review exemption. It's a case-by-case review, and we haven't been consistent with how we apply it, which is, again, what I'm trying to get back to.
Okay.
And I think that's what we're trying to get to, is being consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And being objective. So, I mean, that's what, Well, is that enough?
But I definitely feel like I have enough, yes. But I do appreciate it was thoughtful, and, we will be making more of these in the future. We can talk about whether all of them come to the commission or not. Obviously, this is a big one, and there's a lot going on. And it was on, it was on the list of some of the things that the commissioners wanted to talk about. So I just thought this one was definitely, especially given this first one.
What we just did and what you're going to do isn't going to address what happened tonight, really.
Absolutely not, no.
I mean, even if the gentleman was concerned about retroactively applying, there's nothing to retroactively apply.
Because we'd already approved the design.
Well, beyond that, this is the code. We didn't just change the code. We didn't do anything. We basically said, follow the rules, and if you leave tomorrow and we are all reappointed, if someone replaces us and they decide not to follow the rules, this doesn't pretend.
There's nothing you can do. And also just, given limited resources, we will make mistakes, we will miss things, but we're just trying to get better at that, to cut down on that, et cetera. And this was a case where we brought a project before you that should have had a demolition permit and it didn't. And then when they went to implement the building permit, I was looking at the scope of everything and said, I can't let you move forward given what's happened here, and the fact that we're really trying to change perception.
Yeah. Does the current code say anything about neighbor protest or triggering a hearing?
The appeal process.
Just the appeal, just in the appeal. Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay. Moving on to our department report. This is an opportunity for staff to give us updates.
So I kind of would like to blend this with the next item.
With the agenda forecast.
They're similar and address each other, but so we had council goal setting last week, the 11th. It's an all-day event, good turnout, lots of good comments. But the gist of the presentations was from staff and the direction from council is that there's just no capacity left in our administrative capacity of getting things done. I mean, we are all completely maxed out in the workloads that we have, in the financial commitments we've made, all of those things, and we're essentially doing our best to keep our head above water and keep things coming. But that was the gist of what we told the council, and what the council realized is that there's not a lot of capacity to take on new tasks or add new elements. And so the reason I wanted to bring that back to this tentative Planning Commission agenda or update is I wanted to point out, the other items of interest to Planning Commission. That was a list that was provided to staff from the commission, and I know it had been going on for a long time, Limit on demolition permits is there. Staff has begun to try to tackle that issue. Floor area ratio concerns was on that. Staff began to tackle that ratio. Design review submittal requirements. Staff has begun to tackle that issue. So I just wanted to kind of point out that while essentially we're saying we can't really take on anything else, I also wanted to point out to you that we have taken on quite a bit of the extra things that the commission had identified as as pressing and needed to be addressed. Growth management, again, that's another one that was on the list and we needed to bring it forward. If you look a little bit below that, you'll see items and issues of interest to staff. That's a significant amount of things. Some of those things we've already committed to, so it's such as multifamily housing by right and the opportunity sites. That's a housing element thing. We've already said we're going to do that, and we're legally committed to doing that by May 1st. That's a significant undertaking that we're just beginning to work on now, and we have a very short time frame to be able to get it done. Design guidelines are also on that, but they are not part of the legal trigger that we need to meet. So that we will obviously not meet that date because that's a lot of public workshops and input from the commission and city council before anything's adopted. But just wanted you to be aware of the things that we're trying to keep up to date with in our department. If you turn the page, item 26, short-term rental ordinance update and revisions. Obviously, that took a lot of effort just to get through the process to hear the direction from the commission and city council. We'll be bringing that back for you for final action to finish the revisions to modify the ordinance, and that will be coming back in March and then April for the city council. We're working on fee studies within our department. There's a list of pending projects that we have. Those are all underway. And then we just have the day-to-day things that come up. Code enforcement, you just get a complaint. You never know when that's going to happen, and you have to address it. That's a significant amount of time. You have to make sure you do it right to procedurally make sure you can actually enforce the rules once you get there. And then also just updates on procedures, policies, the code enforcement policy mechanism. I mean, there's a lot of things that have hamstrung staff and decision makers from being able to be effective. And we're trying to address all those and also address all these projects coming forward. So just please be patient. We are adding the agenda forecast to the agenda, and that does provide an opportunity for planning commissioners to voice things that they'd like to see staff work on. But I just wanted you to know that we will not be able to get to anything anytime soon beyond this. So just please be thoughtful in what issues you bring up for you would like to see staff to work on, and patient in the work that we've already directed us to do that we are bringing forward. So that's it. I just wanted to let you know that. And
Thank you.
What's the best way to get our items of interest? We need to do it here, right?
This is the only forum for that. So
And that is this right now, so the agenda forecast. So is there anything that anyone would like to add?
Well, and truthfully, I would just let's refrain from adding anything tonight.
Okay.
And I would like to say,
When you say agenda forecast, I guess my impression was and again, add this big list, so I'm not saying add, subtract, whatever. But is there going to be timing put around so that
Can you turn your microphone on?
I'm sorry. My kind of in my mind understanding of agenda forecast would be that in the next 90 days or the next 8 meetings or what have you, these are topics that are going to be coming up. Be aware of them. If you're going to have issues around them, be thinking that through. Versus this is just kind of a list to no particular order as it relates to when they'll be happening.
so there are dates next to some of them.
Yeah.
Those are ones that we've known about. There are also the pending projects.
Will be coming up soon.
Those are quasi-active. Most of them are active, but we can't control when a developer responds if we send them an issues letter or if they sell the property or whatever. But it is intended to provide more of that. Frankly, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare this, but I wanted to get it out and get it for you and give it to you. So just so you can kind of understand the scope of things they're working at. I can appreciate adding some more time, and we can work to adding more time frames as we're aware of them. And then obviously, if there's something that's directed by the commission, I'm happy to consider a time frame and work to implement it as best we can. But the last point I wanted to make about agenda forecast and adding things is it's staff's expectation that things that are added are in keeping with the council goals that the council sets for us for the coming year.
Well,
Yeah, and I have
I
no
was just
intention
going to
of
ask you, could you prepare us a copy of those things?
Yeah.
Because that would be a big help to know what the council wants.
And
us
now
to
we
work
have
on.
that because there was the goal-setting meeting.
Yeah, I know that, but
Yeah. I'm just saying that for everyone else.
We will be bringing a summary of the goal setting.
It's really rough to listen.
All right.
Might have been worse if you didn't.
See,
I just
Commissioner
have
Hilberstein?
one question. The stuff that's active pending projects, and maybe this is inappropriate for me to even ask this, but I see that number 9 and number 13 include demolition. So will they come based on this discussion we've had tonight? Or?
Their applications include demolition permit requests. So those are lists of the discretionary entitlements they've requested, and demolition is one of them in those situations.
So I guess the real question is, are any of the design reviews, do they need demolition permits?
As I mentioned, we're working on projects currently that some of these are the questions that we're grappling with.
Okay.
So
Okay.
at least one or two of these that list demolition are those.
Okay. Anything else to add?
So in the future, we can give you some suggestions or additions to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not till 2017.
At the planning commission meetings, commissioners can not unanimously, I'm sorry.
Majority.
A majority of the commission can direct staff to add things to this list. Yes.
Why don't we wait till we get city council's goals?
Yeah.
Take a good look at that, and then we can see if, yeah.
Maybe not, yeah, totally.
We have quite enough. Anyways, is there anything else?
Yeah, when will we get, do you have any idea when we'll get those?
Okay.
Is that like a long way off?
Well, they had the goal setting last Wednesday or Thursday. They have to be
Yeah.
summarized, presented to council.
Okay.
There's a process.
We'll get 'em
It's not imminent, but it's not.
So,
Okay. And-
She said 2017.
all right. With that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.